Hey guys, how you doing? Luna here with a new video. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're here to talk about one of the most loved and respected albums of all time, Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. I mean, we've all heard this album, we've all seen the album cover, and we all know that this is by far the greatest piece of music ever made, right?
It's not even their best and most ambitious concept album.
Here's a list of albums that I consider to be some of the most overrated of all time. The Dark Side of the Moon.
Well, damn, it seems like that's not the case at all. This album and its reputation is one of the most puzzling things ever. Like, a lot of people love it, a lot of people hate it, and that is exactly the reason why I wanted to make this video, because I can kind of see both sides. I understand people that say it's a little overrated, but I also understand that, you know, the hate this album gets sometimes is totally unjustified. So I thought, why not make a video giving my opinion on the record, giving my arguments on why I think it's slightly overrated, but why I also think that even though it's a little bit overrated, it's still a great album, one of the best by the band. In order for you guys to understand my feelings towards this album, I need to explain to you guys that this wasn't my first approach to Pink Floyd. When I was having my first music epiphany after hearing the White Album and the entirety of the Beatles' discography, I wanted to listen to the best of the best albums ever made. So I went to professional lists by people like the Rolling Stones, Far Out Magazine, you know, those kind of lists that rank the greatest albums of all time. And because I wanted to leave the best for last, I didn't go to the top 50 or the top 10 or the top 20. I usually went to the top 200 and listened to those albums, you know. And if I wanted to jump into the discography of an artist like Stevie Wonder, for example, if I know that people consider Songs in the Key of Life as his best album and Inner Visions as his, you know, close second, I would listen to Inner Visions first. If I know that people consider Highway 61 Revisited by Bob Dylan to be his best album, I would go and listen to Bringing It All Back Home and Blood on the Tracks and Desire, because I wanted to make sure I leave the best albums ever made for last. You know, I wanted to experience those albums after I already knew about the artist and its craft. Something similar happened with Pink Floyd, because Dark Side of the Moon is the most celebrated album by the band. Actually, it's one of the best-selling albums of all time, selling over 45 million records, I believe. I avoided that album. I wanted to listen to the rest of the band's material, so I went to Animals, Wish You Were Here, The Wall, and even Piper at the Gates of Dawn before I decided to listen to Dark Side of the Moon. Now, Animals, in my opinion, is the pinnacle of Pink Floyd's craft. The production, the guitar playing, the instrumentation, the overall songwriting and composing of the record was so impactful to me, and I loved it so much that the idea of an album that is considered far better by the fans and the critics, which is Dark Side of the Moon, was mind-blowing to me. I couldn't imagine a record better than Animals, you know, inside of Pink Floyd's discography. So when I listened to the record, my expectations were so high, they were almost impossible to meet. But the disappointment I felt when I listened to Dark Side of the Moon for the first time, I was 15, by the way, I was really young, was immeasurable. Like, it's not that I didn't like the record, but it was so much more simple, and it was so much shorter, and, you know, it wasn't so much of a statement as the rest of the band's discography. So I was definitely not enchanted by the album, so I decided to not listen to the record ever again, basically. Because Dark Side of the Moon is the best-selling album by the band for a reason. It's not as complex, layered, and as developed as a lot of the other albums by the band. You don't have any 14 or even 20-plus minute tracks like albums like Wish You Were Here have, and that is translated to a lot of simplicity shining through the entire listen. And the fact that the presentation of Dark Side of the Moon was so hypnotizing and so thought-provoking, you know, the prism with showing the different colors, then there's the name of the tracks, I mean Brain Damage, Eclipse, Money, Time, Breathe, The Great Gig in the Sky. All of these titles and the entire aura of the album showed or communicates a deeper meaning that I personally didn't really find on my first listen. Maybe, once again, the fact that I was 15, I was really young, I wasn't aware of the concept of money and how much evil was behind it, you know, and I didn't have to worry about bills. I would just basically get good grades and then go home and do whatever I wanted with my time. Maybe that's the reason why I wasn't able to relate to the lyrics. But anyway, you know, it still resulted in me not really paying attention to the album until recently. Well, not recently, like 3 years ago, when I started to study music, to dive deep into the world of music and, you know, paying attention to the most important discographies, the most impactful and influential ones, and obviously Pink Floyd was a really big part of that. So I needed to give this album another try, because it is one of the best-selling albums ever. It is the first time an album cover had so much influence influence in how the album's marketing was developed. You know, there was a lot of lore behind this album too, a lot of theories made about the record and its runtime, and you know, it's simply a really important part of the folklore of music. So once I got back into the record, once I listened to the album a few more times, I was able to understand a lot of its concepts, a lot of its lyricism, a lot of its connection in terms of the sound palette of the album throughout the listen. In other words, I was able to see what many people saw that I wasn't able to see before, because it is a very underwhelming listen at first, because you don't really feel the same level of complexity once again as in other albums by the band. However, when you listen to the album without any expectations, when you don't have the context of the rest of the band's discography behind you, hammering down this idea that music needs to be complicated and then you need songs that are more than 10 minutes long, you know, once you ignore all of that, you can really appreciate the beauty and the message that this album tries to communicate. And honestly, after all those years, I managed to really enjoy the record, and nowadays I believe it's one of the best works by the band. I still believe that albums like Animals and Wish You Were Here are better overall, but I personally feel like this talks of the album being overrated are kind of based on people that were expecting the same level of complexity as in other albums. I know that I repeat that a lot in this video, but I need you guys to understand that that is the main problem with this record. You know, Pink Floyd is a band that basically expanded the idea of what people expect when you say progressive rock. You know, you think of Pink Floyd. They are one of the most popular bands to use this sound and to bring it to the mainstream. People don't really see this album as part of the cult. If you like Dark Side of the Moon, then you're entry-level Pink Floyd. You need to listen to the, you know, the 20-minute plus songs in order for you to be considered a part of the Pink Floyd fandom, which is again a silly way of seeing things, because you're only alienating people that are interested in the sound of the band, and plus you're ignoring the fact that this is a wonderful album. In my opinion, in terms of production, this is the best work by the band. You can grab the original master of Dark Side of the Moon and you compare it to an album that was released last week, and more often than not, this album is going to have better production. I mean, that's how good it is. The guitar playing is incredible. The guitar solos across the entire album are just amazing. You know, David Gilmour is a genius. Roger Waters' lyricism is also a peak in this album, except in tracks like Money, where, you know, he kind of plays around with the idea of communism literally. And I know that for a lot of people that's a strong word, but believe me, I come from a country that was destroyed by communism, so I know what I'm talking about when I say that this lyrics play around with that idea. Plus, you know, we're talking about Pink Floyd members here, so they're sitting on top of hundreds of millions of dollars. So for them to say money is the root of all evil, they seem to be surrounded by quite a lot of it. So I'm not criticizing, I don't have a problem with it. He criticizes it, so he should, I don't know, practice what he preaches maybe. I mean, I know that you're supposed to separate the art from the artist, but honestly, in the case of Roger Waters, it's kind of difficult. But apart from this one and every other song, the lyrics are very poetic and beautiful, very thought-provoking too. It's definitely a highlight on the record. And then you have the recording techniques that were used for this album, because loop tapes were used in the past by people like the Beatles and Led Zeppelin, but the way they used it, you know, in tracks like Money, once again in Time, where they put sound effects of, you know, clocks and paper being ripped off representing money, you know, I think it was very creative and inventive, never done before. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of innovation happening in this record too. There's a lot of things, if you want to argue that this is the best album by the band, you do have quite a few arguments, you do have quite a few points in your favor. But that's when it comes to the people who hate the album, people that don't really like to recognize the genius of the record, and that is indeed a great piece of music, one of the best albums from 1973. But I did say at the beginning of the video that I kind of agreed with someone who says the album is slightly overrated. What do I mean by that if I just said this is one of the best albums of the 70s? Well, even though it's one of the best, I don't think it's the best. It's a huge difference. You know, people that like this album and that defend this album argue that this is the greatest piece of music ever made, and that's just an exaggeration. I mean, there's other bands released in 1973 that, in my opinion, were better than this one. I mean, we have Headhunters, Houses of the Holy, Band on the Run, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. All of these albums are at the same level of quality as Dark Side of the Moon, and let alone the entirety of the 70s. I mean, in my opinion, that's the main issue with this album. You know, the fact that people can't find middle ground. It's either black or white, and sometimes things are gray, you know, and this album is a perfect representation of that, because it's not the greatest album of all time, but it's also not a disappointment. It's also not overrated. You know, it's perfectly rated as a great piece of music from the 70s that influenced a lot of people, and that was a really important step in the development of progressive rock music, you know. So I believe that more people should go back to this album, more of the people that say this album is overrated, and kind of take away this idea that in order for a Pink Floyd album or song to be good, it needs to be 22 minutes long, and it needs to be filled with guitar solos and, you know, drum solos and all these incredible guitar playing. Sometimes less is more. Sometimes a more simple approach to the instrumentation can allow you to pay more attention to the lyrics, which was what the band was trying to do with this record, you know. And I guess that sometimes the fans of this album can be kind of pretentious. Like, there's this whole theory about The Wizard of Oz called The Dark Side of the Rainbow, saying that if you play the movie and the album at the same time, it's going to be perfectly synced. They say that it was totally intentional, and then it shows the genius of the band when recording this record, when it's not really true. Roger Waters denied it on the Joe Rogan podcast, and I think before that Mason, I think, denied it too.
Is bullshit. Is it bullshit? Yeah, of course it is. I mean, it may not be. It may be.
Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure they've denied this theory multiple times. You know, you don't need to add an extra layer of mystery to the album. It's a great album, one of the best albums from 1973, an amazing piece of progressive rock, and in my opinion, the best introduction to the band. If you want to get into the sound of Pink Floyd, definitely listen to this album first, and then you can jump into the more complex or, you know, more developed stuff they did in albums like Animals and Wish You Were Here. However, that is only my personal opinion, so if you have your own, and I'm pretty sure you do, you can leave it down below in the comments, and I'll make sure to read it and give you my opinion on your opinion. Do you think the album is overrated? Do you think it's underrated? Or do you find yourself in the gray area like myself? You know, you admit this album is a great record, but you also recognize that it's not the greatest piece of music the band ever produced. Let me know in the comments. I truly hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, you can go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any other videos that I upload. If you want me to talk about any other topics related to music, if you want me to check out a song, album, or artist, leave it down below as well, and I'll make sure to read it and fulfill requests as soon as I can. With that being said, once again, I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that I can see you soon with a new video. But until then, bye.